Okay, welcome to this episode of Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Before I get started, akimashite omedetou gozaimasu. Conventionally translated, generally translated as Happy New Year, but it's more in line with congratulations on an opportunity to grow light, or represents the dawning of something, right? Again, just as I've covered this week during KUDEN and with my inner circle students and whatnot, um, we're shedding light on things uh, that may have prevented us from getting or achieving things and whatnot in the previous year. So this is not like we're going to snap our fingers and recreate ourselves and just suddenly do great things, because a ship's not getting out of a harbor, um, still being weighed by the same anchors. Okay, so that's what we're doing as we move forward. Okay, so the topic of this one sounds a little, I don't know, odd. Why the first move is never the first move. First move of the technique, first move that the attacker throws that first attack, those kind of things. Okay, so we're going to be talking about things like shuhauri and what I'm calling the concept of shoden knowing, right? What most people consider to be beginner techniques, right? What is it that we're supposed to be doing at that level other than just learning kata, right? Okay. And obviously, this leads, right, along a path, actually over here, right, leads along a path to being able to control and create and recognize those conditions that make any given technique inevitable. Okay. The obvious thing. Okay. So, again, what most students call the technique, right? Um, uh, Once you get to a certain level, what you see is that it's actually like the visible residue or the outcome, the effects, right, of decisions that were already made, but that nobody could see. Okay. So we're going to talk about some of these things as we go. But first things, okay. Again, the focus this year, or at least the first part of it, um, for us, right, for us, is to understand that the difference, or the difference between expectations and standards, the difference between outcomes and conditions, right? And the ability to answer the question why to any given technique or individual move. Okay, I'll tell you a story about when that lesson first punched me in the face a bunch of years ago. Um, to any given technique or individual movement, right, in a technique, right? I will be discussing these and more during this session, focused on the strategic and tactical side of tight end physical training, right? So if you're new to Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday, this is not the place where a dancing monkey is going to show you even more techniques that you can just keep scrolling on YouTube, right? This is the strategy and tactic side. This is where we focus on the principles and concepts that underpin and make our techniques look and operate the way they do. Okay, this is the actual knowing part. Okay. So again, before we take a look at these, I want to address a belief. I like to start with a problem. My general framework is problem, process, solution, that kind of thing, right? So before we take a look at these different things that I have waiting for you, I want to address a belief that subconsciously limits people's training. I know it did mine for a long time, right? And that is that you have to copy the technique, you have to learn the technique first in order to, you have to copy it to learn it, or you have to learn it to know it, those kind of things. And this is one of those tricky things, because the answer is yes and no, right? If we get it right, it's part of the growth process. If we get it wrong, we can get stuck and think that we've made progress. Okay. So again, misunderstanding that difference between how these things work, right, is why people get stuck for years. Okay. So again, let's start with this understanding of the shuhari, this ancient process, or what I like to call frameworks, to guide the training, right? The development. So I have a pen here that's contrasting color. Okay, so Shuhari, and again, I have Shuhari over here, and I have Shoden, Chuden, and Okuden over here. And while students are led through these things, beginner, intermediate, advanced, that's not what they mean, right? They point to very specific methods of training and principles and lessons to be learned at different stages of training to make a difference. These are not rank based. These are not time and years based. Anybody can get stuck at any one of these levels and think that that's the whole thing. Okay. So again, things are not always what they seem to be, or they're not always like the simplistic translations we get. Okay. Anybody that has any of the later books by Hatsumi Sensei, like Unarmed Fighting Techniques of the Samurai, okay? If you have that book, you might have already noticed, just like in Isuka Sensei's book that came out that he published or wrote before he passed, on the Gyokoryu, both the English translation is there and the original Japanese manuscript. Okay. Now, like me for many years, you might be tempted to just look at the English because that's the easy part, right? Okay. But there's a lot of shortcuts in there. There's a lot of simplistic translations that, if you take it as gospel, word for word, you might miss some things. Take Unarmed Fighting Techniques of the Ninja, or of the Samurai. That has the definite, or the step-by-step instructions for each of the kate across multiple lineages. Right? That seems pretty cut and dry. Except if you look over at the Japanese version, the words that are being used in the actual translation that comes off the scroll doesn't match. Okay? And it's not that anybody set out to deceive anybody. Okay? But this points to a different teaching process in Japanese martial arts, where the teacher gives enough to give the student a base to start exploring farther, right? Why would Hatsumi Sensei put the original Japanese manuscript in a book that doesn't have the Japanese in the title, right? Why not just reserve that for a Japanese form of the book where the whole cover and everything is in Japanese? There's no English. Here's the Japanese, right? For Japanese readers. And then everything else would just be English for English readers, or French for French readers, or whatever. Interesting, right? At least it's an interesting thought. Okay, so let's take a look at these things, right? So if you're new to this concept, this is going to be a brief explanation because it goes way deeper. If you're old hat at this, then treat it like a review, but I need to make sure everybody's caught up. Otherwise, the thing with comprehension, whether you're reading something or listening to something or whatever, if you hit a word or a term or a concept that you don't know, comprehension drops below 10%. Right? That's why it's important, if you're reading something really thick or dense or deep, right? You should have a dictionary or some kind of reference source nearby, so that when you hit something you don't understand, you can look that up, understand it, and then go back and reread that passage and carry on. Because otherwise, we think we understand because we can read the words, but reading the words just doesn't equal understanding. Okay? Just like being able to demonstrate a kata step by step doesn't equal knowing the kata. It's not the same. Talk about that here shortly. Okay, so shuhari, right? Shu, this kanji, shu, means to copy or preserve, right? But what is it that we're copying? Okay, so we're copying form, okay? We're copying form to build structure, right? Not understanding this comes back to bite people in the butt over there, and with a quote that I have from Hatsumi Sensei that it's just this is one of these things that get passed around the internet a lot, and then it trips people up. Okay, so yes, we're copying the form, but we're copying form to build structure. Okay, to hardwire muscle memory, not so we can do it right, so we can't get it wrong. Again, not the same thing. Okay? Ha, this is not somebody laughing at you, making fun of you, whatever. Okay? This is also not the same ha as in horse or like hajutsu, bajutsu, horsemanship. Not the same. Okay? This kanji means to break. Okay? To break. Right? This is where things like henka and waza live. Right? But what is it that we're doing here? Right? So here this is about variation to explore why form works. Okay? Variation to explore why. One of the most important words in growth. Why form. What I have in my notes. Form works. Yeah, form works. Okay? Just like we do Whiteboard Wednesday, and it's about strategy and tactics, and it's about the principles and concepts, so we can understand what's behind why the techniques look the way they do and why they work the way they do. Okay? Today, specifically, we're going to be taking a look at why the beginning of a kata is not the beginning of the kata. Okay? All right. And then ri, right? Ri means to transcend. Okay? To transcend. Okay? So what we're looking at here is transcending the technique, and in this case, by seeing before it, by seeing the bigger picture about what's really going on. Okay, and again, this gets us we get stuck if we're not if we get a lesson. And remember, Hatsumi Sensei has always been teaching to the most senior students under him at the time, even way back in the beginning. Whoever was like senior, he's teaching to them, and over the years, he's always taught to the senior most students. He's reminding people of this in the dojo all the time. I'm teaching to, if the highest level people at that period in history was fifth dans, he'd say, I'm teaching to the fifth dans. Okay. If it were 10th dan, I'm teaching to the 10th dans, right? Whatever. Okay. And everybody else was instructed to find a shidoshi or a shihan who could teach them the basics implied correctly, the basics, so they could understand what he was doing. Because what he's doing is not what it looks like he's doing. Okay? Anyway, so transcend. We're transcending technique. Okay? Now, again, we can think we know what something means, but this is why we need a teacher, we need a guide, we need somebody who can translate that meaning so we can get our head tuned to the frequency, or we can be speaking the same language. Okay? Because language is an expedient. It's as much as we think we're being very, very specific and very particular and whatnot, language is an expedient. Okay. So so transcending it by seeing what comes before it, what's happening underneath, right? What's happening during it that you can't see, that it induces or inspires movement, but you can't see the movement because it's going on in here, or it's going on in here, or it's going on in muscular movement that's happening just before that motion happens. Okay, talk about that here in a bit as well. Okay, so shu is necessary. Okay, learning the techniques. Okay, but shu is not the goal. Okay, the goal of shu is something. The goal at the hot level is something. Okay, I have a skill development progress worksheet that I give my students, local and long distance, and so it has beginner, intermediate, advanced, basic, intermediate, that kind of thing, right? And so we've got mechanics, we've got dynamics, we've got staging, intent, those kind of things. So in basics or in mechanics, it says kami, body movement, and striking. Okay, no grappling is listed. Okay, it's not that we don't have what people call grappling things, but grappling is a combination of kami, body movement, and not striking. But what is striking? Okay? What is striking? Striking is limb extension and retraction. Yeah, but what about hooking things? Okay, well, see, still doing this, and the body in taijutsu, the body takes care of that extra stuff. Not that we can't do this, but there's still extension and retraction away from the source joint and back to it. Doesn't matter which angle we go on, still extension and retraction. Okay, in the Gyoko Ryu, it's called shuho. Okay, exploring the arms and the hands and how they work, how they can be made to be stronger with less effort. Hoho or soko no kama, soko no budo, ashiho, you could call it, right? Same thing with the legs, okay? Taiho, right? Same, the whole body, right? So anyway, good, right? So this is necessary. We'll just keep moving with this because the next point that we should look at is where people get stuck at shu and ha. Okay, my focus closing out 2025 and opening up 2026 has been focused on this stage and oku level training. Okay, which people translate as advanced, but gonna get there. Right. So where people get stuck. All right. So some people get stuck at shu, right? Copying forever, right? Never seeing it. The answer to why are you doing the technique that way is what's our style. That's the way it's done in the Gyoko Ryu, Koto Ryu, Kukushin Ryu, Takagi Yoshin, whatever. Okay. The reason why is because it's just cause. Okay. They can come up with other things, right? And that's a good start. But if a fifth degree black belt is still doing a Shodan level kata at fifth dan, like they did when they first learned it, and they're not teaching beginners, there's a problem. Okay, there's a problem. Now they can revisit things and explore pieces, but there's a huge reason why Hatsumi Sensei didn't do the base kata. He would have other teachers come out and demonstrate the base kata. Okay, because continuing to stay in that realm would have screwed up his abilities beyond that. The problem with not learning this stuff properly at this stage and trying to jump ahead and just imitate Hatsumi Sensei or whatever master teacher at the level where they are is that you miss all the things that created that ability. Okay, so others get stuck at the hot level, right? Collecting and making up clever henka variations, right? Mistaking variation for understanding and prowess. Okay, one of my teachers used to talk about this using an analogy of maturity, right? As a child grows, right? At the elementary level or young child level, okay, they get their rules and how things are done, whether it's spoken or they just watch the activity of how parents do things, right? And it's very explicit, right? This is how we do things, okay? And then you have the adolescent stage, right, where they get sneaky and tricky to kind of get by on certain things, but at that level, they have a standard answer or two or three to common things that happen every day, but they confuse that with knowing everything. But they really have a limited view of the way the world works. Okay? It's only in the mature levels where they start to recognize, or they, as we get older and whatnot, we recognize that, being loud and obnoxious or cutting corners and all that. It only works as long as we don't get caught. Okay. And we can lose more than we gain. So that's where wisdom and those kind of things kind of kick in. Right. So again, when it comes to Henka, I think where this came in, I got, again, not on a pedestal here, right? I got trapped by it myself, right? Hatsumi Sensei in the books, and especially in the Japanese form of the books, right? There'd be snapshots of the step by step, and then all of a sudden there'd be some variations, like you could do this or you could do this, and he would do the same thing in teaching, right? Go on, go on YouTube, look up videos and whatnot. At some points he'll stop and he'll go, you could do it like this, or you could do it like, right? He'll show these different things, and um, and people get caught on that. Okay, but the question is, when and why would you do one of those variations over the other, or do all of these variations that he's demonstrating do the same thing? Okay, the same way. Do they produce the same results? Okay, because let's say he's doing a thing where it's a distraction, and he says, you could do it this way, or you could do it this way. Okay, so these things that he's showing may all distract the person, but do they all break that person's balance in the same direction? Or do they cause collapse in a certain direction? Or they cause ease of movement for them and a trap in, in another area the same way? Okay, this matters. Matters a lot. Okay? In the beginning, we can't see it, but with experience, we start to recognize that, just because I can hit somebody over here because it's an open target, the kata can't be finished the same way, right? One of the definitions I give for kata, right? For beginners, I tell kata that, look, this is an expert role model. You'll be an expert. Here's how an expert would do it from this lineage, right? But later on, up here, if we're heading toward this kind of stuff, we need to be able to look at kata like bad habit breakers, because the way we do any given move at any point in a kata determines how easily or difficult, or if at all, we'll be able to do the next one or the next move or the next move, or whether that will end the same way. Okay, so I've got a quote coming up for you by Hatsumi Sensei that people love to cling to, that absolves them of responsibility for being able to actually consistently duplicate a kata at increasing speed and pressure. Okay, so again, Henka is not about doing different things just because you can. Okay, Henka is about understanding the conditions that allow or require different things to happen. Okay, so again, if you caught this week's KUDEN Monday, right? I started off somewhere in there, right? I discussed the difference between outcome-based thinking and condition-based thinking. Outcome-based thinking is the person is just worried about not only thinking about the technique ending the way the teacher ended, the guy's on the floor and he got him in a lock and all that kind of stuff. They're just not paying attention to all the stuff before it that allowed for that to happen. Okay, that's outcome-based thinking. Right? That allows for fantasy. That allows for all kinds of things. That's the cause. One of the root causes behind people doing things stronger, faster, harder to try to force something to work, instead of taking the time to understand that each of those moves before it were goals or outcomes in and of themselves, and they were the conditions necessary to produce the thing, that cool thing we saw the teacher do. Okay, all right. So if this is causing confusion or whatever, that's a natural part of the process. Okay, don't take this to be something like, I'm broken or I don't understand or whatever. Right? You're not. It's a part of the process. Okay, so trust the process. You don't have to trust me. Right? Just like I said during KUDEN on Monday, I don't need to be believed. Okay? I'm not asking to be believed. Nothing. Okay, I'm passing on lessons and showing you why those lessons are true. And that in and of itself makes belief a moot point. Okay. All right. So, where the hell am I? There we are. Some people. Okay. All right. So let's jump. We're going to focus at this B level. Okay. So one of the reasons that I give advanced stuff or higher level things to people who are not there yet is because one, it takes time to develop that. And if you wait, let's say, like I was just telling some students the other day, if you're working on, or you want to be able to pass the fifth on test, right? And I hate attaching a title to it, right? But the Saki test, the ability to sense unseen danger, okay? The force of the killer, Saki, right? Killer intent. Um, you don't wait until you're a fourth dan to start working on it. Start working on it way back because it's going to take time to develop because I have to learn all the things that it's not, which is kind of backwards thinking for Westerners, based on the Western academic system, because that system of learning is based on accumulation of knowledge. Okay? But the higher levels require letting go of a bunch of things that actually get in the way of the ability. Okay. So there are some frustrated students the other night. We were working on some very, very base level drills to kind of start picking up on that intent and sense and whatnot. And they weren't sitting down with their eyes closed. Eyes were open, standing, facing the person with the shin eye and whatnot. And uh, then I had them close their eyes. And so sometimes they get it, sometimes they didn't. There was all this kind of frustration going on. And I said, stop writing off when you get hit as a failure. Okay. You recognize why you moved. What was that sense that you had? Okay. What made it wrong? Okay. Because the first thing you have to sort out before you can do that consistently, like all the time, right, is you have to be able to know the difference between your brain feeding you a paranoid thought and your human survival mechanism creating a sensation of actual real danger. Until you can split the two, it's guesswork. Because left brain and ego want to run the train, except the part that actually does the work of detecting Saki isn't in that function, and they don't communicate. Okay, so anyway, so we're going to focus here. Change color again here. All right. So let's go. Just do this. Let's go back to everything. Now is about B. Okay, just like I talked about the fifth dan thing there on Saki, right? It's not a paranoid response. It's not a paranoid thought, right? That is a left brain thinking danger exists. Thinking I sense something, right? Creates all kinds of weird shadows. But we have to understand what it is, okay? And what it is for us. Teacher explaining what it is for them, or somebody else who passed the test, what it is for them, that causes ego to grab a hold of an answer and try to fake it. Okay? It's a control freak's response, right? So that's why I may tell a student what it is for me, but tell them, no, you need to find it for you, okay? Because what it is for me, one of my teachers from way back, Jack Hoban, right? He and I described the sensation of the feeling of that pressure and what completely different. To me, it feels like a gentle nudge coming from the angle and a gentle pressure coming from the angle and direction of the danger, right? He's always described it as he feels a vacuum get created. Well, that's completely opposite. But that's okay because it's an individual thing, not right. It's not to have the ability of the teacher is to have the understanding and the ability, not being a clone. Okay? All right. So B then, right? This level, right? B is not abandoning technique. We'll talk about that here in a minute. It's not abandoning technique. Okay? It is not improvising randomly. Look at me go, sensei. I can make shit up on the fly. Okay, fantastic. Okay? And it is not doing whatever feels good. Okay? People like, ego likes to pick and choose the techniques and the things that it's good at. Tends to steer you away from things that you're not good at, you don't want to look at, looks a little hairy, or that confuses you and things like that. Okay. Universe doesn't care. Right? As a matter of fact, the bad guy hopes you steer away from those things, and that's all fine. We can pick a fight style. We can pick a fight system. We can pick favorite techniques. We can choose. We can gravitate towards certain favorite kind of things. But all the teachers have always said we can't have preferences. We can't have favorites. We have to be equally good on both sides, right? And that means a master teacher from across the room can look at you when you're moving and not be able to tell which is your strong side or your weak side, which is your good side or your bad side, because you don't have one. They're equally good. Okay. But the lesson is the lesson because we never know which direction an attack is going to come from. Everybody assumes that they'll be paying attention and they won't get stabbed in the back. Right? Or that they know what a bad guy looks like, and that person who looked perfectly or felt perfectly, safe wasn't going to stab you or whatever. Okay. So if Ri is not these things, it's not abandoning technique, it's not improvising randomly, right? And it's not doing whatever feels good, then what is Ri, right? So Ri is seeing before the technique. Okay? And we start by understanding all the stuff that comes before the beginning of the kata that's written in the densho. Okay? The stuff that's hinted at over in the makimono. Two sets of things. Okay. It is influencing conditions. Influencing conditions before, there it is again, before contact. I'm going to borrow Koto Ryu again because it's one of these things where the models, more of them than not, make it easier to describe this. At the Shoden level, okay, because you're always, at all levels, there are kata. So I have to copy and learn the kata, and I have to learn the principles and concepts behind it so that when I make a variation, the variation is doing the same thing the base model is doing. Otherwise, it's not a true variation. It's not a henka of, it's something else. Right? And then to be able to transcend that lesson to get to the heart of what's really going on. So all of them have it, right? But at the Shoden level of the Koto Ryu, the attack happens, we back away, we find that singular point or line that when I come back in, I can tag him and things are over. Because one of the primary principles of the Koto Ryu is to be able to drop somebody with one finger. Not that you're going to use one finger, but it's being on that perfect spot. Okay. So that's all cool, except that Shoden level kata, what most people don't understand is that if you're working Shoden, you're working at how to survive being late to the party, being late to the fight. Talk about this again later, right? Because the attack's already coming. You did nothing to be able to escape, nothing to be able to dissuade, right? Hopefully you didn't do it on purpose, because right? But you're late, right? And now you got to go from a negative, right? Algebra works. You got to go from a negative to get back to 0 point before you can even, right? You got to neutralize his advantage before you can move forward with your own. Okay. At Chuden, you're either standing right here or you're moving in on each other. Okay. Because the Chuden level kata in the Gyoko-ryu or in the Koto-ryu look like you move in on somebody who's static and you just put a whoop ass on them. But there's something that he's going to do. There's shit he's doing in his head, whatever. Just because he's right there or he's walking in, there's a bunch of stuff that's going on in here. So at the Chuden level, all the stuff you did at the shoden late, backing away and having to find that under pressure, now at the chuden level, as that, whether he's walking toward you or you're walking toward him or you're walking toward each other, during that interim, before the official start of the kata in the densho, you've already worked out all of that stuff that you had to do on the fly in shoden. So at chuden should be easier. But the technique at shoden is closer to the beginning of the fight because I didn't see it coming. There was nothing I did to minimize whatever. Chuden, 90% of the technique is happening before contact. So when contact happens, 4 moves or less, 10 seconds or less, this thing is over. Okay? Okuden, see, most people translate that as advanced. It's not advanced, it's substrata. It's stuff that there's mistakes that we're making these other things. It's about what our head and heart's doing. It's about bad habits and things like that we do, concerns, fears, hesitations, and all that kind of stuff that create moments where everything can work well in the dojo, and then it meets the street. It doesn't go so well. Okay? And it's not that it doesn't go so well and we lose, because that's failure. When I say failure is not always about like losing the fight. Failure is I couldn't win using all this stuff I just put all the blood, sweat, and tears in. It's a learning. I end up having to resort to caveman tactics. I have to fight like everybody else. Okay? What people tend to do at that point is they still give the win to Ninjutsu or Gyoko or whatever, right? But the truth is, Nagato Sensei pointed this out not too long ago, right? Don't confuse winning the fight if you failed on the principles with doing this, right? You have to know the difference between everyday fighting that everybody else is doing and this level of control that we're spending a whole lot of time, effort, and money to learn, or blood, sweat, and tears, whatever you prefer. Okay, so seeing before the technique happens, influencing conditions before contact, and Ri is also acting when outcomes are already constrained. Acting, and what do I say? When outcomes, there you go. When outcomes already constrained. What does that mean? Right? What that means is, and this is where Ninjutsu shines, you're not supposed to win. By the look of all things, right? Conditions are already constrained. You're at a serious disadvantage. Where Ninjutsu shines is in its ability to neutralize the playing field when the threat or your opponent or opponents or whatever, they have massive advantage and you do not. How do you still win? So as long as we hold on to a one-to-one, nose-to-nose, Chikado Krabe, brute force fighter mentality, we'll never get this. All we're doing in our head is trading out one style. Our style is better than that style. This is not a style. This is survival science. Okay? All right. So this is important, right? This understanding this difference is important. Okay. Ri is often misunderstood as freedom, like you can do whatever the hell you want. Okay. But Ri is not freedom from structure. Okay. It's freedom because structure is already correct. We just tend to call it's integrated into muscle memory. It is your new flinch response. That's why we don't train until we get something right. We train until we can't get that thing wrong. Somebody spooks it, whatever. And we move to it, not because we left brain drove our body to do that, but because our body did that during that blink when the left brain took a vacation. Okay. So to think about this more correctly, if what you're doing feels exciting, expressive, doing a thing, right? or creative under pressure, right? Trying to be tricky, right? That's usually ha pretending to be ri. That's the teenager pretending to be an adult. Okay. Now, not you guys, because you guys are all enlightened. So ignore that last part. Okay. But when it comes to this enjoyment and stuff like that, the other morning I did some catch up testing and whatnot from December, and had one of my students working with this hira and what we typically call wind mode, which is just very free to move and whatnot. And I had an uke come out and they could throw any punch, grab, or kick. Now I kept it at about half speed because I'm looking for something very specific. And that specificity is control and use of the principles and concepts. Okay. And if the student is doing well, then I'll tell the uke, bump up the speed. If they're still doing well, bump up the speed. Okay. But half speed is a good place to start. And so I found myself having to continually remind the student, okay, you're too close, add a little bit of distance, right? Find the distance where you can slow down, but he feels the need to speed up to get at you, right? Think more about this being a trap instead of you being tricky and finding yourself having to like flinch block and those kind of things, right? And so forcing him to do certain things, right? What you're doing shouldn't be about getting him. It should be about removing possibilities from him and influencing him to have to do things your way. I'm not trying to use this stuff against his fight system. I'm trying to get him to drop his fight system and have to do things my way. That's subtle control, because if somebody feels like I'm trying to trick them or control them, they'll resist. Okay. So afterwards, the whole the story here comes afterwards, where he came up and said, because he's been doing martial arts since he was a teenager, right? And so what he admitted was, at a certain point, at a certain speed or intensity, some switch flips and he falls back into that old thing because he enjoys mixing it up. There's a sense of like, pleasure and fun and all that. And I said, that's great. You can enjoy mixing things up, but don't confuse that kind of training that's usually associated with point or light contact training and survival training. Okay? Because while you can still lose this thing over here, the consequences are not as dire as they are in survival training. Okay? What I'm training you for is to control things in a situation where you are not king shit. You're not even at an equal level. Okay? And the consequences of failure is death. Okay? Or being maimed permanently or whatever. Okay? It's not the same. So by all means, enjoy mixing it up. But make sure when you're working with a partner, that's the thing that you're stay focused there. Okay. But be careful that you don't do that more than you do this other thing that you're trying to get involved in, or that you're trying to master, because in a survival situation, if you slip to that distance, proximity, right? You were staying close enough so you could get him too. But if you're in range, or if he's in range for you, you're in range for him. Okay. So speed and strength and all that kind of stuff are great until he is bigger, he is stronger, and he is faster. Or there's more of them to have to contend with. Then everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Okay? That's why sport and competitive fights are fair fights. Weight, belt level, whatever. Are there other ones that are open? Yeah, you can see it very, very quickly. Okay? So, anyway, let's get back to this, right? And let's talk about why the first move is never the first move, right? I've been alluding to this coming up to here, right? But visible movement, what I'm really talking about here is visible movement is not the beginning of the fight, right? The only time this might be the beginning of the fight, remember, there's exceptions to all rules, is somebody explodes out of a panel van or steps out of a dark corner or whatever. One has you in a bear hug, next thing you know, right? And you're okay. So, yep, this stuff right here teaches you how to go from negative to having a chance at going home. Okay. Everything else is about more control and setting things up in a way where the ending is inevitable. Okay. It'll happen by default. He just doesn't know it yet. Okay. So there are things where, right, the physical movement might have to be the thing, but it's still not that, because when somebody grabs me, my mental training should kick in where I feel the pressure. I feel how he has me. I feel space and openings. I'm watching this next person and how they're coming in, right? I don't I don't hold on to the trap type thinking or the limited thinking that if he grabs me in a bear hug, he has all of me. He doesn't have all of me. Okay? When that punch comes into my gut, I can move. I'm a big guy. I can move my gut to the side, being held in a bear hug, so that his friend gets hit or kicked. Right? Or this guy goes to punch me in the face. I drop my head off, and his friend gets punched in the face. Guess what that does to the grab here? Right? Again, this is the science of dealing with multiple attackers. Okay? But anyway, right? So visible movement, for our purposes today, visible movement is not the beginning. The beginning of the kata, that first thing where he punches and you have to move, it's not the beginning. Right? We've got a couple of conditions here for what the beginning are, or what the beginning is. Okay? Because again, we have to get over this trap, right? Where most people there might have been a little glitch in there. I apologize. I don't know what the hell happened, but it looks like our internet glitched for a second. So anyway, hopefully you got the gist of it. So again, most people think that the technique begins with the first move. It doesn't. Okay. By the time the first move appears, even if you're watching a video online of Hatsumi Sensei doing something or whatever, right? By the time you see him move, most of the technique is already over. Okay. And if you wait until it happens, if you wait for that attack to come, right? Like I said earlier, you're late to the party. Okay. So I'll talk about what important things are in here. Just a couple of key things, just to kind of wrap things up, so that wherever you are in your training with any given technique, you can focus there. All right. But what we're looking at here is the beginning of the fight, the beginning of the attack, the beginning of your response, right? Can be seen in different phases or in different things, right? So there's we'll call this an approach phase. Okay. Now again, remember, I'm talking about training here and I'm talking about training here, which means we've already done this, or we're training here to get there, and we're training here to get here. Okay. So at the Chu level, I already talked about that. That's the approach. What are we doing? Okay. There's distance calibration. The hell's distance calibration? Okay. One of the things with these kata here, and I know when you watch techniques, when you watch kata on YouTube, they're within a certain camera angle. They can't be moving a whole lot unless they got somebody doing things. But more often than not, the techniques that are demonstrated online are being demonstrated from that mentality. That mentality. Sometimes this, but there's something that goes on here, okay, that most people miss when they do static start copy training. And that is, he gets there, he may or may not get his distance, bow, he gets set, and then he launches. Okay. As though Scotty from the Enterprise beamed us both down in place, and then he's going to throw a punch. Okay? No. That's the moment he decided to punch based on what I gave him, or based on the conditions that he's been constrained to, or the conditions that I've been constrained to. Okay. Distance calibration is, let's say he's moving in on me, right? Okay. There's a certain point where he's going to feel like he's one step from going. So when he takes that step, the next thing, that punch is that attack is coming. Okay. But based on the kata that I'm doing, one or the other of his feet need to be forward. One or the other of mine have to be forward based on what the kata is showing. Okay. So let me just move here a little bit so that I don't wreck into my light over here. So when he comes in, what I can do is create a moment where he feels like he has to catch up. Instead of him being all in control and me waiting, hoping I got this shit, right? At a certain point, before he's close enough, I can start backing up. And so here's what happens. He's moving in. See? Space shrinks. Yes? We see this. Okay? But at a certain point, if I do this and then back up with him, that kukan stays the same. So if he wants me, he's going to have to overcommit. He's going to have to rush. And that starts flipping the story, flipping the narrative, because he's no longer in control dictating terms. I am. But only if I think strategically. Okay? So distance calibration is making sure that I'm at the right distance where he would overreach. Far too many students, especially beginners, right? But if you see anybody that's higher than beginner and they're still doing it, again, this is where they're stuck. And the training format is probably safe for them to do that. Nobody's calling them on it. Okay. But far too many students start with the distance. I see them do it with sword, all kinds of stuff. They start with a distance where the attacker, the kata says the attacker is going to do tsuki. So they're going to launch a stepping punch, right? A lunge punch. But they're actually standing close enough to where the attacker could get him with a jab, or at the very least, reach out and grab a sleeve or a hand and then go on him. Okay. Or there's something off with their kamae where they're too tense. And so they can't relax to move. The flinch response, that's all things that we uncover in Okuden. Okay. So, but distance calibration is what's the correct initial start position? And it's going to be different for Seigan, different for Ichimonji, different for Jumonji, different for Hira, different for, okay? So distance calibration. There's also alignment. This is one of those things we're going to work on during the Friday masterclass, right? When we're focusing on this pre-attack strategy, this alignment, because there's a huge difference in the angle, what the angle of his attack will be, even if we're talking about a straight punch. It doesn't have to be a hook. It doesn't have to be whatever, right? If I'm lined up eye to eye, nose to nose, right? And say he's stacked this way, where it's going to come in straight, okay? So if I'm lined up this way, well, then he's aimed here. But if I'm just slightly off, he's now going to come in from slightly off. That changes the shape of the space on either side. Same thing if I move the other way. Same thing if from right here, I do this. Now it realigns my limbs relative to his fist. So it's not just body alignment. It's not just your alignment of center. It's alignment of weapons to weapons, shield to weapons, those kind of things. Okay. Intent reading. Hey, you want to be my partner? Oh, sure. Okay. Ready? Okay. Well, great. But what about the guy who comes up and goes, and then like explodes on you, or the guy that comes stomping at you from across the room and you're already, things are jacking up, right? Very, very different. Okay. There's also, I'm not going to write all the stuff in for number 5. There's also reading his posture or his stance, right? To be able to get a sense of what his fight style is, right? So where are the fists? How are the shoulders rounded or not, right? Are they more squared? Are they more rounded, right? Is he more forward and rounded, right? Are the hands here? Are they stacked? Are they more this way, right? What the angle of the elbows, regardless of the position of the hands, or the hands don't move, but the elbows do, right? It's different variants of the same fighting system. Or the elbows don't move, but the hands do, right? That fist was going to come from a different angle, right? So being able to read those kind of things, okay? Being able to read their leg length, their stride, which equals their reach, right? Those kind of things. All of that, right? So the first move is not initiation. It's confirmation. Confirmation about what? How prepared you were before the shot and before his attack initiated. That is universal justice or universal truth. Okay. So this is like after we die, right? People talk about us. It's too late to change anybody's opinion. Should have all been done before that moment. But right? I know after we're dead, who cares? Our kids, people that loved us, people that believed we were a certain way and believed the lessons that we taught, and then they turned around and found out that maybe that wasn't true, or the opposite. Right? My grandfather passed away. I realized that he was involved in more stuff legally, more stuff than I ever imagined. Right? He had dinner with commanding generals at the end of World War II that we've only ever read about in history books. Holy shit! He never talked about that stuff. Interesting. Anyway, all right. So again, this is where Friday's masterclass comes in. We're going to be looking at some of these things as that we're going to be looking at this approach phase. And so any techniques that we do, it's only going to be the front end of the technique because I want students to get a handle on being able to control the conditions under which he has to operate so that I can do things much more easily with less wear and tear on me, less effort, right? That kind of stuff, right? I've already controlled a whole bunch. I'm not waiting for him to do what he does and be late. What looks like he threw a punch and I just happened to do the right moves, like there was a whole bunch of stuff that got controlled and identified and limited on him and opened up on. Okay. Most of this art is invisible, which is why it has been said since the early 80s that nothing in ninjutsu is what it looks like. The art of invisibility begins not with smoke bombs and shit like that. It begins with controlling and affecting outcomes by controlling and affecting conditions. And this is not just a martial arts idea. Hatsumi Sensei's always talked about this as well. Not just a good martial arts idea. This is a good life idea. Doing it at work, doing it at your family, doing it, right? You be practicing this shit all the time. Okay. So again, during Friday, we'll be doing some drills, front end techniques, that kind of thing. We're going to have the chance to see these things that I'm looking that I or Hatsumi Sensei or any master teacher, right, is looking for, is looking at, watching, right? And here's the key, right? As my uke or training partner is walking up to me and getting set into position and whatnot, I'm watching that happen. And while they're doing their thing, I might, based on the technique, I might shift my weight subtly to one leg, making it easier to move the other leg without having to take a preparation step or without having to come up to move, those kind of things, right? Anything that'll cut down on that moment of surprise. What I want to get to is a moment of inevitability. Right? So this is Okuden level training. Okay? Not advanced. It's not Okuden because it's more advanced. It's not Okuden because it's tricky. It's not Okuden because it's secret or nothing. Right? It's the shit we can't see that is more important than the stuff we can. Okay? Because it's deeper. Okay? Because it's on the inside. Okay? Where the internal mistakes or gaps live that can literally break a technique or a defensive action before he ever throws anything. Okay. Anyway, again, I'd be remiss, and I went way too far into this before I said it. My guy who edits this stuff was going to say, you almost forgot, right? Don't forget. If you're getting value out of this stuff, like, share, subscribe, all that. All right. Now I got it out of the way. Okay. So that leads us to this illusion that goes on. Let me change color here again. Let's do Chuck. No, let's do. Okay. That's 10 to 20%. Okay. There's this illusion that when we watch a teacher demonstrate a technique, we're watching the whole thing. That's exactly what we have to do. Yeah. When you're first learning. Okay. The illusion is that's 100%. It's not. Okay. The the invisible, the important stuff, these levels, the invisible part of a technique, the Uda, whatever you want to call it, right? Is 80 to 90% of it. Okay? I was first introduced to this when we were doing gun disarms, and my teacher said gun disarms are 10% technique, 90% psychology. Because if you can't convince him that you're a victim and cause him to close range and do shit he would not normally do so that you can do the move, you die. Okay? So stopping here is doing the end, the effect, and not studying the causes that allow that to happen easily. Okay. This is survival science. Okay. So, what you see me do, what you see Hatsumi Sensei do, what you see any master teacher do, is at best 10 to 20% of the technique. Okay? The rest lives in perception, assessment, timing, other subtle levels of control where you're controlling conditions. Okay? This is why copying a technique alone doesn't work. And I think people get that at a very primal level, which is why a lot of people go, kata doesn't work on a fight, man, or on the street. You can't do a kata in a real fight. That's true. But the structure the kata teaches, practiced well enough to get it ingrained, right? Yeah, that's what will come out. Okay? It has, each one of these things has certain reasons. It's the goal of the training, not what the training looks like. Right? People see beginner, intermediate, advanced. Not these kata are designed to teach you the most critical principles and concepts, the non-negotiable lessons of that particular lineage. So, yeah, you learn the kata, so you can learn the principles and concepts that not only are non-negotiable, but if you lost all the other scrolls and you knew these, you could rebuild these. Okay? This is inside out. This is movement. It looks like it's movement based, but the movement is a reflection of the principles and concepts. This is knowing the principles and concepts and being able to adjust and do things on the fly in a way that ends things quickly. This starts at a negative and has to neutralize his advantage before I even have a chance of winning. This one, he doesn't have a chance to get started. This one, I remove his need to attack me altogether. And if he does, the moment he goes, these kata look like these kata. Not exactly, but you can use Shoden kata here, right? There's so much shit that you've done ahead of time that when he throws the attack, his balance is everything collapses. But if the problem is that way too many people are just learning kata and demonstrating kata without understanding what's behind the kata. So it doesn't matter which scroll they're training off of. They're doing this with a little bit of this sprinkled in, confusing those two with this. Sorry. I did the same thing for a long time, right? You get ass kicked long enough, you might start to get it. I know I did, right? But you also have to be stubborn enough to not let ego convince you to quit. Because either he's full of shit, or I'm going to go to that teacher over there because they give me rank that I think I deserve, or I'm going to go train in something else that makes I feel like I'm fighting. Because at this level and at this level, it feels boring. So fighter mindset, it feels boring. It looks passive. It doesn't look like you're doing anything until you work. And then it makes no sense. Well, that's bullshit. Your partner must have fallen down for you. Okay? I know what it can look like, but things aren't always what they look like. If you've ever been cheated on, or you're heartbroken, or whatever, people can be pretty fucking manipulative. Right? So, anyway, um, so again, the rest lives, right, at these higher levels, right? So again, this is why copying alone doesn't work, right? You're copying effects, not causes. The higher we go, we have to understand causes, because we can influence our lives, we can influence interactions, we can influence, even what this is pointing to is influencing a violent stranger that you have no connection with. This is a cold interaction, and you can influence this person to do what you want the way you want it, and they think that they're in control, right? They've lost control long before they realize they lost it. But you can make that happen to a stranger who's enraged and wanting to beat, break, or kill you that you don't know. Well, shit, if you can do that to that person, then doing it to people that you know, and I don't mean maliciously, right? But being able to influence and affect things and steer the world and create the kind of life that you want to be living should be a fucking cakewalk, because you're connected to all those people. You know about them, you know their habits, you know what they, if we pay attention. This is not just on the battlefield. Battlefields come in all kinds of flavors. Okay? So, what I've been harping on with students here since the new year is uh, what I call the why test. And I don't mean the letter Y, right? I mean why. Because that's not what or how. I know you know that, but why? Okay? What's the why test? Okay? This is a standard. Okay? This is how things shall be done. Right? Okay? This is a standard that I've been holding students to, and it matters. Okay? And that standard is, if you cannot explain why a movement exists, or why you're doing a given technique based on an attack that an attacker is throwing, right? Upper level students from a given lineage, but we'll just come back down to a given movement in any technique. If you cannot explain why a movement exists without telling me what you just did physically, right? Or how you did it, okay? Then you don't yet know the technique. And the point here is learning the model. The point here is knowing what it does. What is that model teaching you about how to control his options, limit his movements, limit his attack vectors, angles, those kind of things, right? That's copying a movement. That's martial arts theatrics. That is learning it so you can understand what it's doing to him, any given movement. Okay. So if, and I've told students again and again, if they cannot tell me why when I ask for that why, then they don't know it. If they don't know it, they can't intentionally, strategically use it against an attacker. It doesn't mean they can't take up the position. They can't go through the movements. But if they don't understand just the nature of Seigan no Kamae, that lead leg's out there, that lead arm is out there, if they don't understand that most fighters see the hand and arm is vulnerable and the leg is easily swept, and they don't adjust that kamae so that, and I don't mean adjusting it, I mean they can take up the form, but they understand that this and this are protecting this and the leg. Okay? That leg will get swept or that arm will get attacked. Okay? But what is it doing? Okay? Both of them. They're baiting. It looks weak. Right? There's all kinds of things that are going on. But the leg actually has me positioned because my center's here. Most fighter types want to hit me here, here, whatever, right? Kick me in the groin. Okay? That's way farther away from them than my foot is. So yeah, I know it looks weak to them, but that's why Hicho is my I need to be able to go to Hicho in one move, right? Without moving my torso first to move the leg, right? But in Seigan, my foot is how much farther ahead, closer to him than my targets or my fist are. So he can't gauge distance well. I'm actually closer to him than he thinks I am. It's important. Okay. So again, knowing how to demonstrate the choreographed moves of any given kata or technique, right? And knowing the strategic reasoning and why of any given move in that kata, they're not the same thing. Okay. Told you I'd tell you later when this first time this bit me in the ass, right? Met this one seminar and I shift back into, back then we just called everything Ichimonji, right? But into this Seigan no Kamae. And one of my teachers at the time, Shoshi Malmstrom, walks by and he goes, freeze. Okay. And he said, why is that hand there? And then before I could say anything, he said, and if you're going to freaking tell me that it's there because that's our style, I'll punch you myself. Okay. 80s training, not wussified. You can't talk to people like that. Really? Even warriors? Holy shit. Guess who's never going to be a warrior? Right? Why's your hand there? So what I said was, is it wrong? And he said, no. Now answer my question. Why's your hand there? And he kept reiterating that I was not allowed to say, because that's where it belongs in Seigan. Because that's not answering the why. Strategically, tactically, what is it doing to him or for me as a benefit? And he said, if you can't answer my question, stop doing it. Where am I supposed to put it? You're supposed to put it right there. But until you can tell me why, you can't use it. That was the lesson. You don't understand why it's there. Why here? Why is Gyoko Ryu here? Why is what is it doing? Right? I had a student come back from a seminar one time where they were working with Doko, one of the techniques, right? With Doko. And he's looking around the room and like some students have the hand here where we introduce people to it. Some have it here, some have it like way up here, some have it like behind the head. And he pulls his teacher over, the senior, and he said, like, which one is the right one? And the guy goes, well, you could do any of them. I understand that it's physically possible to do any of them. But in this given technique, based on what we're supposed to be doing to him and with him, which one of these is strategically correct in controlling the conditions that allow this technique to work quickly, easily, and effectively? You can do anything. Anything is possible. What's probable? What's strategically advantageous? Right? So, again, if you're at a seminar, you're a class, whatever, right? Don't be surprised if I tell you to freeze and ask you why a certain body part is there or why you hit a given part. Well, because it weakens it. How? Why hit here when I could hit a whole bunch of other things from the angle I'm coming in on and weaken him? How does this contribute? If you're just looking to hit people and you're in fighter mindset, it doesn't fucking matter. But if you're looking to get here and you're looking to get here, nothing matters more. Okay. All right. So again, if you can't answer the question, just like with me, right? If you can't answer it, that doesn't mean that you're bad or that you don't know anything or that you don't whatever, right? It doesn't mean you're broken. Okay. It means you're still aping, right? You know, apes, right? Copy little thing, right? Okay. That means that you're copying movement instead of understanding control. Okay. So the whole point of this stuff is to spur growth, kind of like the omedeto, or the akemashite in akemashite omedeto gozaimasu for Happy New Year. Akemashite comes from the root verb akeru, which doesn't mean to begin, right? There's nothing in there about happy. There's nothing in there about New Year. Nothing. Okay. Akeru means to open, to grow, to grow light, to dawn, right? And omedeto, usually translated as congratulations, it's not about an achievement. Okay? You made it to the new year. Omedeto, right? Congratulations is pointing out something that one should pay attention to, that is deserving of attention. Because lots of people didn't make it to the new year. They didn't survive that long. You have an opportunity to shed light on things that you didn't know previously that will allow you to do better going forward. This is a moment worthy of attention. It's not a prize or an achievement. Okay? So, again, clarity, right? Right. So, again, let me give you some examples of why-based questions that you could ask yourself. Right? Maybe I should have put that over there with the dens anyway. Right. So, like if I ask somebody why they're doing something, oh, well, it's what the kata says, or it's what I did was I hit him with a shuto, and yeah, I know. Why'd you hit him with the shuto? Because it's in the kata. No, say that's circular. We're having a circular discussion here. You're not telling me strategically how this takes something away from him and gives something to you. Okay? Because if you hit him and it doesn't work, he's more pissed off. And now you can never do that thing again because he'll be watching for it. We would be, right? Okay. So here's some examples of why-based questions. Okay. Or why-based answers. Sorry, why-based answers. Okay. Why'd you do that? Right? Because it collapses his base. Cool. Okay. It limits his line of attack. It forces overcommitment. It buys time and space. It masks the next move so he can't see it coming. So that's different. Okay? That's very different than I hit him to hurt him. I hit him to take that arm out of the fight. Well, okay. But is that arm necessary for him to do some? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So the thing here is that if the explanation needs a mirror, or you're just describing step-by-step movements, okay, then you don't understand the technique or the move or the kamae or whatever yet. Okay. So again, what we're looking at doing is reclaiming Shoden as principle-based, not choreographic. Shoden, yes, beginners learn this, but this is what beginners are given first. But the show here doesn't mean beginner. It's not the show used to write like Shodan, okay, like first level things where it implies beginner, head of class, that kind of thing, right? This kanji is the show as in Jodan, can be pronounced Jo, right? Jodan, like Jodan no kamae, okay? High level. Den, transmission, right? Joden or Shoden, right? In Gyokoryu, that's what it's called, Joryaku. Yaku just replaces the den, right? But it's Joryaku, high level. It's the most important principles and concepts that a student has to get first. Then we can play with it. Then we have to make sure that we don't have shit that is on the inside, fear and all kinds of things that, or bad habits and whatnot, that can manifest once we leave the dojo and cause all this work to be shot to hell. Okay. So, there is something that Hatsumi Sensei has said over time, and this shit circulates on the internet. I'm going to wrap up here really quickly here, but I think a lot of people have heard this thing. But Sensei said, just throw the kata away, right? You don't need it. My question is, who is he talking to? Because people take those things as blanket statements, and certain people latch onto them as their cue or their reasoning behind like not having to be as responsible. Okay. as some kind of a free pass to do it their way. Okay, so but we need to properly understand what he meant, right? One, he was talking to higher level people who were having a problem getting into that realm and getting into this realm because they were stuck here. They're being stuck on the kata was what was preventing the next move. But here's the thing: how do you throw away something you never had? Well, you can't. Okay, forget kata. How do you forget something you never knew? You can't. Okay, but the purpose of kata is to do what? Build proper structure. So I'm going to throw away the model that allowed me to build the structure so I don't need it. If we build a skyscraper and there's a bunch of construction equipment out front, right? Cranes and scaffolding and all that, right? Does that shit stay in place as lawn ornaments after the building is built? Nope, because at a certain point, that shit's in the way. You can't finish the parking lot. You can't do the landscaping. Can't open the building because it's not safe, right? The analogy is no different. The kata is the structure that teaches proper structure. We just need to work it enough that we can't not do it. That doesn't mean you're going to do the kata, but you're going to do a lot of things very kata-like, right? Because your angles are going to be right, your kamae is going to be right, right? Distance, all that kind of stuff, because you learned it. But now you can freely string your basics together and literally recreate or create new kata, henka, variations of them based on what's coming at you, based on what you need. Okay. So again, this whole throwing away kata is just that quote, that lesson from him, that is not permission to skip kata. It's also not for students below a certain level of proficiency. Okay. Where kata becomes a limitation. Okay. If I cannot do this kata under pressure at speed, then I got bad habits. So kata are bad habit breakers. Okay. Um, that quote only applies after kata and kata training has done its job. Okay. So if structure isn't internalized, throwing away kata doesn't create freedom. It creates gaps, right? And it allows flaws to remain often unseen, where an attacker can use them against you intentionally or not. Right? Just has to things just have to conditions have to come together. Cause and effect will take care of shit all by themselves. Okay. So connect this back to D, right? When conditions are already controlled, the kata doesn't need to be done. It appears. Okay? But it doesn't appear out of thin air. Cause and effect. Right? It's all about causality. Okay. That is when it's thrown away because it's already internalized. It's already been absorbed. Okay. We don't we don't copy the kata because that's the point. We copy the kata so the kata takes us on. I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but language is failing. Okay. So again, this year I am less concerned about expectations, right? I am because expectations are outcome based. Okay. Standards are the conditions by which outcomes become inevitable. There's a reason we take a certain angle. There's a reason the limbs are positioned where they are. There's a reason that we come in at a certain way or make contact with a certain target a certain way on a certain angle. Right? Those are conditions that's all about cause and effect. Okay. So the standard is not whether you can perform a technique in the dojo or during a test or for a belt or I don't know what sensei's pat on the back, thumbs up or right whatever. Okay, the standard is whether your training makes it unlikely that you're going to end up being beaten, broken, or killed by an intent attacker on the street or in your home or in your workplace or wherever. Right, that's the standard. Right, done. Okay, so again, Friday's masterclass, we're going to be focusing on these pre-attack strategic things, the Uda side, right? Not the written step-by-step things. Okay, it's going to focus on this physically. right? We're going to work on, again, the approach phase, distance calibration, early alignment or shifting alignment, using the first move as confirmation of getting those things right, right? Not we're going to focus on it for that, not effect, right? See, it was in this position and he punched anyway. Well, he's going to do what he does, right? But the way he does it, when he does it, and all that, I get to choose that. Right? So if techniques feel inconsistent, this will be why. So if you want to get a heads up on this, and I promise, once you see it, this is like those optical illusion kind of things. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So forevermore, after you go back to watching Hatsumi Sensei videos or whatever, any technique demonstration, you won't be able to not see it. Okay, the invisible will be made known. Okay, so what do I have? And that's it. The last thing, don't forget. I mean, this is Wednesday, this Friday, right? Right after the master class that I'm talking about, our yearly Daikomyo side kicks off. Yes, pun intended. And so we're going to be focusing on uh, again upper level kind of stuff. But how do we neutralize somebody's strength, or how do we eliminate resistance, even when they're moving, even when they're doing whatever they want to be doing? Okay. So in the Gyokoryu, the terminology doesn't matter as much, but what we're talking about is what Hatsumi Sensei has called the 0 point of resistance. Okay. And understanding how to do that mentally, emotionally, to them, regardless of how strong or fast or whatever they are, and catching them at these points. And it feels like you're not doing anything, which is why our T-shirt and the slogans and the memes and the stuff that you've probably seen around. I call it the art of nothing, right? Which again, to most people, it sounds woo-woo, and we get way fewer people signing up for this kind of stuff because it's easier for people to get their head wrapped around. Well, this is Gyokoryu, Jodyaku, Kata, and spear and sword. Okay, so that's what's attractive, but it's also what keeps people trapped at certain levels. Okay? So anyway, let's just wrap this up with one final thing, and then I'll as soon as I can, I'll get to comments and whatnot. Think about this: if a technique feels hard, if it feels difficult, you're already late. Okay, so train those things that come before the move, and the move takes care of itself. Okay, that's it. I'll see you next class.